Our travel today brings us to Corydon, Indiana. As you can see, it was the first state capital of Indiana, and it was also the hometown to the great actor and acting teacher and fisherman and painter and guitar player James Best. Well, how you doing, you handsome boy? You ready to go out and see the grave of James Best, Rosco P. Coltrane? What do you say, Flash? Your name's not Flash, is it? We're going to tell everybody how Flash got his part on the show, aren't we? Daze with Jordan the Lion and the Joster begins now. So here we are at Cedar Hill Cemetery. So as a little boy, about 4 or 5 years old, Dukes of Hazzard was one of my favorite TV shows on television. I loved watching the General Lee go flying through the air. I loved watching Bo and Luke Duke try and outrun Rosco P. Coltrane, and so I'm excited. I never got to meet James Best when he was alive, so I'm excited to get to come pay our respects and talk about his amazing life. So he was actually born in Kentucky to some miners. His father was a miner and his family was not very well to do. He had a lot of brothers and sisters, he said, and when he was 3 years old his mother passed away and his father had to send him to an orphanage where he was adopted at the age of 4 by the Best family. James Best. Gosh, what a great actor. So he had a fun story. He was raised out here. He was born in Kentucky, but his adopted family lived here right over the border. He was raised here. He said he used to go fishing a lot in the Blue River and Indian Creek. Would eventually later on make his home out here for a time. He's buried right here beside his parents, Armin Best and Essa Best, who he said were great parents. So his life really took shape when he was in the military. He was in World War II and he was part of the military police in Germany, and he said he was getting shot at all the time, like every day. And he said one day he went to go get a coffee and a donut up at the PX hall and ran into a woman there, and he said in German, "Hey, come over here." And she came over and he said, "Are you American?" And she said yes. And he planted a big kiss on her, and she said, "What the hell's the matter with you? I'm gonna call the police." He said, "Well, I am the police. What can I do for you?" He started laughing, and he said he noticed that she had a patch, and he was asking her what it was, and she said that she was part of the entertainment division of the military. So he asked her on a date, said, "Hey, you know, can I take you out and get a couple of drinks, see what happens?" And she said, "Well, on one condition, you have to come to my play." And he said, "I don't want to go to your play. Can't I just pick you up afterward and we'll go out?" And she said, "Nope, you want to go out with me, you got to go to the play." So he went to the play, and he said as he sat there and watched it, it absolutely changed his life. He said, I couldn't believe how fun this was to watch. And then he said he started to realize, hey, I know some of those people up there. Some of those people used to be officers. So he started to inquire and said, hey, how do I transfer? Because I'm getting shot at every day and I'd like to be an actor. So he had a good record and everything, so they granted his transfer and he would end up joining, and that's where he started to hone his craft as an actor. He had never done it before, and now he was in love with it and was doing different shows in Europe while he was serving our country. And when he got out, he said the first thing he thought to do was hitchhike to New York City and start his career. See at the base of his stone they have a veteran of armed forces down there. Now he did Broadway for 3 years. He said he took anything he could get at first, and then he worked his way up to Broadway, and then eventually Universal Studios came knocking and offered him a contract. So in 1949 he went out to Hollywood. Now he ended up doing a lot of work. He said in an interview, that he counted one time he had been in over 600 television shows and over 80 movies. He would end up being one of the most sought after acting teachers in all of Hollywood. He would end up being the acting teacher for people like Burt Reynolds and Gary Busey, and in fact he would have a pretty close friendship with Burt Reynolds. He ended up producing the movie Gator, and he was in Hooper with Burt Reynolds, and so he ended up having a really, really interesting career. But he said he always idolized Jimmy Stewart, and so he had made movies with just about everybody. He was proud that he could say that he had worked with some of the greatest actors of the golden age, from Humphrey Bogart to Paul Newman, who eventually would be his neighbor in Laurel Canyon. he had quite a life and quite a story. He said that he got to know Jimmy Stewart, and he said one time he was working on a picture with him and they were in the same hotel, and he could do a really great impression of Jimmy. So he said, I got bored. He said, I called room service and I did a Jimmy impression. I said, do you have any wine? I'd like to get some wine. And they said, yeah, we do. And he said, I want the French stuff, the good stuff. So give me 2 bottles. He said they sent the 2 bottles up, and then the next day when he saw Jimmy, he said Jimmy had become a general when he was in the services. So he went up to him and he said, General, I used your voice to acquire 2 fine bottles of French wine last night. He said Jimmy loved it. He said Jimmy always loved whenever I would do an impression of him, but he would always act like he was frustrated. So he said when I said that, he goes, well, who's gonna pay for it? And he started laughing. So he said he had a really great rapport with people throughout the industry. So he was always working. He said he worked with just about everybody except for the people that he would eventually work with in Dukes of Hazzard. He would do, you know, all the Western shows. He would be a bad guy. He'd be a part of just about anything. He would do cult films, and he'd be in Rawhide, and he'd be on the Twilight Zone, and I mean, really, you name it, and he did it. But Dukes of Hazzard was what changed his life. Now, he admitted when they offered him the audition for Dukes of Hazzard, he didn't want to do it. He said, just by the name of it, I thought it was like a gang picture, and I didn't want to do another one of those. So I told him that, and they said, no, this is a good old boy picture. I mean, good old boy TV show. They're gonna film it in Georgia. And he said, I had just worked with Burt Reynolds down in Georgia, and I really loved the area. I love the people. So I said, okay, I'll go in for that. So when he went in for the audition, he said the only person that he ended up working with on the entire show that he'd ever worked with before was Denver Pyle. He said everybody else was new to him. But he said, I came into the audition and it was for Sheriff Rosco P. Coltrane. And he said, I respected the firemen and the sheriffs and the police departments of this country, so I didn't want to make a mockery of it. And he said, so I asked him how they wanted me to play it, and they said, well, we want him to be kind of funny. He said, so the first thing that came into my mind was to play him like a 12-year-old. And he said, so I remembered when I used to play with my 2 little girls, and we would play Hot Pursuit, and I would do that funny voice for them to make them laugh. He said, I just went into that voice, and everybody in the room started busting up laughing. And he said, they cast me right away, right there in the room. He said, I was actually the first person that they cast on the whole show. And he said he had never worked with Sorrel, who was Boss Hogg, but he said, I always wanted to. And then once we got in a room together, we had just an amazing chemistry. He said, you know, at first there was not really a real direction for Rosco, but he said, I started ad-libbing. He said, and it was mainly because they just didn't have me in a lot of stuff. So he said, whenever Boss would get a phone call, I'd get right down there in his ear and I just ad-lib stuff. And he said, one day I told him, hey, it'd be funny if I went to light your cigarette and I caught your hat on fire. So he said, so that's what we did. And he said it got such a great response from the workers on set, from the cameramen to the boom mic operators. They ended up ruining the hat and had to do a second take because everybody was laughing through it. So he said they didn't even want to spend the money for a second take. They're like, hey, we don't want to ruin another $250 hat. So he said the show became a huge success, and he decided that he wanted a dog. And he asked the producers to write in a dog, and they said no. So he said, so I just went to the pound one day and I got my own dog, and that became Flash. He said, well, Flash ended up becoming a star. He said, would you believe it that I was getting $2 grand to take Flash to make personal appearances? And he said the way that we would get him to do what we wanted when we were in the sheriff's car was, he said he loved wieners. He said he loved hot dogs. So I'd always put a hot dog on the dash, and he'd just stare that hot dog, and then when they'd yell cut, I'd give it to him and he'd be happy. So he said mostly it was a fun time and everything was going well, but he said he did have some issues, and he ended up quitting over those issues. He said that he felt that everything that they were doing with the show was very dangerous. All the car jumping and the motorcycle scenes and everything, he said it was just dangerous. And he started to get tired of it and complain about it. He was saying like, hey, you got to take better care of our stuntmen and the crew. And he said he himself was tired of all the, you know, Rosco would always get run into the lake. He said, I was just getting tired of doing those because he said the water, he said, you know, I signed on to do this in Georgia. He said then 5 episodes in, they decided to move it back to California. So I was kind of bummed about that. But he said then they had this fake lake that we would use, and he said the water was all mucky and disgusting, and it was super cold. So he said, so by the time we'd be doing this, he said it would be cold and it would just be uncomfortable and disgusting. He said they didn't have any showers anywhere close by where they were filming. So he said, plus I was giving notes every time we were doing an episode. I was giving them ideas, and they would change the script and use my ideas, and I was getting no credit for it. So he said, so finally one day I just said, hey, I want more money. I want a chance to direct. I want you guys to treat the crew better. I want them to have better conditions. I want all this stuff to be better. And I want everybody to feel safer. And he said they didn't want to do it, so he decided to leave the show. Now he said at first they just let him go. And they tried to replace him with Dick Sargent and various people, but they just didn't have the chemistry. And so he said eventually they were putting out in the papers, like in the Variety and things, saying that he quit because he wanted to make up his own makeup stylist. And he said, I never wore makeup on that show, so that was bull. But he said they finally realized they couldn't replace me, and they came back and said, what can we do to get you to come back? And he said, just fulfill everything that I asked for the first time. And so they did. So he came back, but he said he always felt like even though he got to direct, they would only give him the episodes to direct that they thought were kind of crummy, because he thought that they wanted to see him fail. So pretty much for the rest of his life, he would kind of be known as that character, and also highly recognized from being on the Andy Griffith Show and just everything he did. He was always in something, so he's always known. But then he became kind of heavily sought after because of his paintings. He started painting like southern landscapes, and he said I would invite my co-stars in to have lunch with me in my dressing room, and I'd usually be working on a painting in there, and they'd see it and they'd decide that they wanted to buy it. He said people like Jerry Lewis, Lucy, Tammy Wynette, he said they all had his paintings, and he loved doing it so much that that became a hobby that he would do, and he would sell the paintings on his website. He also loved to fish, so he said when he got tired of acting, he would just take off to his place in Florida and go out on the water and fish. He had a really funny story because he said, as I told you, Paul Newman was his neighbor, and they were good friends because they'd been in movies together. He said, and one day I'm out there fishing, and I mean, the fish were so hot they were jumping into the boat. He said, I called Paul, and I said, Paul, you gotta come down here. I'm catching fish left and right. They're jumping in the boat. He said, so Paul got excited. He said, I never get to catch fish. He said, every time I go fishing, I don't catch anything. I said, boy, you'll catch them now. So he said he got on a private flight, and he and his wife flew down immediately. He said, he started laughing. He said, I took him out on the boat for 3 days, and he caught one fish. He said he was mad, and he flew back to Hollywood, and he goes, the next day I'm out on the water, and the fish are just jumping in the boat again. I go get on my phone. I said, hey, Paul, you got to come down here. The fish are just jumping in the boat. And he said, I just heard a dial tone. He just hung up on me. Thought that was such a funny story. He continued to act forever. He said at one point the studios tried to make him a leading man, and he just told them, I don't want to be a leading man. I can do it, but I feel like if I'm a character actor, I'll get to work into my 80s. And he did. He was working a long time. He worked most of his life well into his 80s, formed a production company with his wife, and they would do some of his projects. They would also produce commercials and various things, and the guy just really gave back a lot. The numbers of actors that he counseled and taught is just astronomical. Pretty much every leading man in Hollywood at one point during that time. I mean, he was a teacher for decades. The interview I saw, he was saying he had done it for at least 35 years or more at that time. So, guy really gave back a lot to Hollywood, and probably why he's one of the most beloved people to ever come out of there. Sadly, James Best ended up dying of complications from pneumonia, but boy, did he have a nice long life. And the man that was born, Jewel Franklin Guy, would go down in history as the great James Best. And when he requests that we remember him with laughter, we do. And anytime somebody says they're in hot pursuit, or they yell for Flash, we think of old James Best. Go, 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 go. Rest in peace, James. Thank you all for watching. We will see you next time from Corydon, Indiana. Have a great night, and goodbye.